He wasn't a CEO, a celebrity, or anyone people cared to notice. He was just a black janitor, the kind of man most folks walked past without even lifting their eyes. But standing in front of him that morning was a billionaire woman, a woman so rich, so powerful, she could buy and sell everything he owned with nothing more than the loose change jangling at the bottom of her designer handbag. So when she insulted him in Chinese, assuming he was too broke, too uneducated, too insignificant to understand, she had no idea she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that this quiet, invisible janitor carried a secret sharp enough to slice right through her arrogance in seconds. This is the real story of how an ordinary nobody, with one perfect, fluent Chinese sentence, completely flipped a billionaire woman's world upside down. And by the time you reach the end, you'll understand exactly why the quietest person in the room is usually the one you should fear the most. But before we dive in, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable stories just like this. You won't want to miss a single moment of what happens next. Lila Carrington strutted into the gleaming lobby like she owned not just the building, but the entire city. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, announcing her presence with the kind of authority money could buy. Staff scurried out of her path, guests glanced nervously, and the few who dared to meet her gaze quickly looked away. Billionaire, influential, feared, she had built a reputation on control and intimidation. But today, that control was about to be challenged in a way she could never predict. Daniel Brooks moved quietly across the lobby, his broom gliding over the marble, his mop leaving floors polished to a perfect shine. For almost 10 years, he had performed this work, blending into the background of opulent buildings, where rich and powerful people often assumed he was invisible. He was used to being overlooked, dismissed, or even mocked. But he carried something no one in that lobby could see: patience, dignity, and a mind sharper than most would dare assume. As Lila spotted him, she felt an irritation she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the way he didn't immediately look away. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence in his posture, as if he knew he was unshakable. She marched toward him, her designer bag swinging with deliberate authority, ready to humiliate someone who had dared to ignore her. "Hey," she barked, pointing at him with a manicured finger. "What are you staring at?" Daniel looked up slowly, his expression calm and polite. "I wasn't staring, ma'am. I was finishing my work." Lila's face twisted with disbelief. Normally, people would cower, apologize, or at least avert their eyes. But not him. Not this janitor, who she assumed would tremble at her wealth. Her chest rose in indignation. "I'm talking to you," she snapped, stepping closer, her voice slicing through the air. "Don't you know who I am? I'm a billionaire. You should be." Daniel held up his hand slightly, not in fear but in gentle assertion. "Ma'am, I am aware of your position. But respect cannot be demanded. It is earned, not bought or forced." Lila froze, caught off guard. Most people in her presence would have quivered, apologized, or laughed nervously. He was neither nervous nor intimidated. Her face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief, but Daniel's calm demeanor only seemed to grow stronger under her scrutiny. "You dare lecture me?" she hissed, her voice rising. "I could ruin your life with a single phone call. You're nothing, just a janitor." He didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled politely. "Perhaps, ma'am. But even nothing has dignity if it is held with honesty." Whispers began to ripple through the lobby. Guests paused, staff exchanged nervous glances, and even the elevators seemed to hum quietly, as if waiting to see what would happen next. Lila, accustomed to obedience, stared, stunned, at someone who refused to bend under her power. "You think you're clever just because you know some fancy words, huh?" she spat. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Daniel leaned slightly forward, his tone calm but resolute. "I do, ma'am. And I also know that wealth and power are temporary. Respect and dignity, however, are not. No one can take that away unless you allow it." Lila's eyes narrowed. Her pride wrestled with an unfamiliar sensation, admiration mingled with fear. For the first time, someone had refused to bow to her wealth and arrogance. Daniel wasn't just a janitor. He was a force she hadn't anticipated. She tried to humiliate him further, to regain her authority with another sharp insult. But Daniel spoke first, fluent, precise, and in perfect Chinese. The words were clear, confident, and cutting, leaving everyone who understood them stunned. Even without translation, the authority in his voice was undeniable. The billionaire woman's chest rose and fell, her face registering shock she hadn't felt in years. Around them, the lobby buzzed with astonishment. A man she assumed she could belittle with ease had turned the situation entirely around with nothing but his calm confidence, his dignity, and one perfectly delivered sentence. Daniel returned to his work, still quiet, still precise, and still unshakable. Lila, meanwhile, remained frozen, realizing that in trying to dominate someone she considered insignificant, she had been completely outmaneuvered. And in that moment, it became clear, the quietest person in the room, the one everyone overlooks, is often the one you should fear the most. Lila's mind raced. She had insulted him, expecting him to shrink, but instead, he had turned her arrogance into silence. Her usual tricks, intimidation, name-dropping, cold contempt, were useless against this quiet janitor who seemed to radiate confidence without needing to say much. The guests in the lobby watched in stunned silence, sensing the clash between wealth and integrity, privilege and principle. Daniel wiped a spot on the floor, moving with a calm precision that seemed almost deliberate, as if to show he was untouchable. Lila's fury was now simmering just beneath her expensive exterior. She leaned slightly toward him, her voice sharp and clipped. "Do you have any idea who I am? I don't just insult people for fun. I make them regret ever crossing me." Daniel looked up, his eyes steady and unwavering. "Ma'am, I understand exactly who you are. But I also know that the way we treat others defines us far more than the money we hold." Her lip curled in disbelief. Most people would have cowered, apologized, or left. But he wasn't moving, wasn't afraid, wasn't intimidated. She felt a rare, unwelcome emotion creeping in, vulnerability. For the first time in a long while, she realized her wealth didn't guarantee control. "You're a janitor," she hissed, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed anger. "I can destroy your career, humiliate you in front of everyone, and no one would even care." Daniel didn't raise his voice. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, thoughtful. "Perhaps, ma'am. But destroying someone else doesn't make you powerful. It just shows insecurity. True strength is shown in how we lift others, not how we put them down." The lobby was now completely silent. Staff and guests had stopped moving, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Lila's mind raced, trying to find a way to regain the upper hand. She opened her designer handbag, as if brandishing it like a weapon, and leaned even closer. "You think words like that can scare me? Do you even know what kind of world you're in?" Daniel's calm smile widened, and in flawless Chinese, he said something that cut through the tension like a razor. The sentence was so precise, so confident, that even people who didn't understand the language could feel its weight. Every syllable carried authority, calm intelligence, and a dignity that Lila couldn't touch with all her billions. Her face went pale. Her arrogance, built over decades, faltered under the unexpected weight of his words. The very guests who had admired her confidence now looked at her with surprise, even amusement. A billionaire humbled by a janitor? It was almost unbelievable. She opened her mouth, tried to respond, but Daniel spoke again, still calm, still precise. "Ma'am, wealth can buy comfort, influence, even fear. But it cannot buy humility, wisdom, or respect. Those are earned, and sometimes the quietest voice in the room teaches the loudest lesson." Something inside Lila shifted. Anger still simmered, but beneath it, a sense of embarrassment crept in. For the first time, she realized she had misjudged someone simply because of appearances. Daniel had not just defended himself. He had revealed a truth she had ignored for her entire life. Money can make people powerful, but it does not make them right. Her hand tightened around the strap of her handbag. She was used to control, to people cowering before her, to bending situations to her will. But this janitor wasn't bending. He wasn't afraid. And worse, he had made her doubt herself. "Do you even understand who I am?" she demanded, almost shouting now. "I'm Lila Carrington. I'm rich, influential, feared. You're just a—" Daniel held up a hand, cutting her off softly. "Ma'am, I know who you are. And I also know that true courage isn't measured by how loudly you can shout or how many zeros are in your bank account. It's measured by how you treat people who have no obligation to respect you." The words landed with the force of a hammer. Lila froze, her mind spinning. Guests in the lobby shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch the showdown. Staff exchanged glances, whispering in disbelief. A woman who had humiliated hundreds, perhaps thousands, in her life was now facing a calm, unwavering challenge from someone she had considered beneath her notice. She tried to think of a comeback, something sharp, something that would reassert her dominance, but nothing came. Her carefully constructed image of power and control was crumbling under the quiet authority of a man she had underestimated. Every word he spoke reminded her that arrogance, no matter how well-funded, could not shield her from humility. Daniel returned to his work, polishing the floor with serene precision. Lila, meanwhile, remained frozen, her face a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something she had not felt in years: respect. Not the forced kind that money demands, but the genuine kind that comes from witnessing character, intelligence, and courage in someone unexpected. In that moment, it became crystal clear: the quietest person in the room, the one everyone overlooks, dismisses, or ignores, is often the one with the greatest power. And Daniel, the janitor everyone had walked past without a second glance, had just flipped the billionaire's world upside down without raising his voice, without demanding anything, and without losing his dignity. Lila's mind was a storm of disbelief and fury. She had spent decades perfecting the art of control, commanding rooms, intimidating people, and bending situations to her will. Yet here she stood, in the middle of her gleaming lobby, completely undone by a janitor she had assumed was beneath her notice. Every word he had spoken echoed in her head, each syllable a mirror reflecting her arrogance. Daniel continued to work, unhurried, almost methodical, as if her presence were nothing more than background noise. But to Lila, it was deafening. How could someone so insignificant remain so composed in the face of her wealth, her power, and her fury? Every inch of her wanted to lash out, to remind him of his place, to show him that she had the power to destroy his life with a single phone call. But something inside her hesitated, something she hadn't felt in years: doubt. "Do you even understand the world you live in?" she demanded, trying to regain control. "You can't possibly survive here without fear, without respect for people like me." Daniel looked up, his expression calm, almost compassionate. "Ma'am, the world does not measure people by fear or money alone. It measures them by the choices they make, the respect they give, and the integrity they maintain. I may not have your wealth, but I do have dignity, and dignity cannot be bought." Lila's chest rose and fell as she processed his words. Anger fought with humiliation. How dare he speak to her this way? How dare he not crumble under her gaze? She had humiliated countless people before. Their fear had fed her power. But Daniel refused to play the game. He refused to acknowledge her authority in the way she demanded. "You think words like that make you clever?" she snapped. "Do you know who you're talking to? I own more than you could ever dream of, and I can ruin your life with a single phone call." Daniel's lips curved into a polite, knowing smile. "Ma'am, power over others does not make one strong. True strength lies in standing firm without fear, in treating everyone with respect, and in remaining calm when others try to provoke you. If anything, it is your response to people like me that reveals your character." The lobby was silent. Guests, once casual observers, now watched intently, sensing a rare confrontation, one where money and status were being tested against quiet courage. Staff members who had once feared Lila now glanced at Daniel with a mix of admiration and disbelief. And Lila felt an unfamiliar sensation gnawing at her chest: vulnerability. She swallowed hard, trying to reassert control. "You think you're teaching me a lesson? You're nothing. You're a janitor. People like me don't listen to people like you." Daniel set his mop down briefly, meeting her gaze. His eyes were calm, unwavering, and for the first time, Lila realized that he wasn't afraid, not of her wealth, not of her influence, not even of her fury. "Ma'am, I am aware of who you are," he said softly. "And I also know that humility and respect are far more powerful than money. You can command attention with wealth, but you cannot command respect if it is not earned." Her hands clenched at her sides. She was used to fear, compliance, and trembling apologies. But Daniel didn't tremble. He didn't comply. He didn't need fear to be noticed. And worse, He had completely stripped her of the certainty that money could solve every problem. You, you don't understand, she said, voice cracking slightly, frustration leaking through. I could make sure you're unemployed tomorrow. You would be nothing. Everyone would laugh at you, and no one would care about your dignity. Daniel's expression softened, almost gentle. Ma'am, even if you could do all that, it would not change who I am. You may have wealth and influence, but I have integrity, and that cannot be taken from me. You are free to try to diminish my position, but you cannot diminish my character. And in the end, character is far more powerful than fear. Something in the lobby shifted. People who had once quietly watched now leaned in. Lila's authority, once unquestioned, was crumbling under the weight of a single janitor's calm defiance. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone present that Daniel was not just performing a job. He was demonstrating a kind of power money could never buy. Lila's breaths came faster. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm inside her. She had always thought herself untouchable, immune to embarrassment. But here, in front of witnesses she had long assumed would support her, she felt exposed, vulnerable, human, and she hated it. Daniel returned to his work, polishing the floor with serene precision. Lila's gaze followed him, a mixture of fury and reluctant admiration. She had tried to humiliate him, to assert her dominance, and instead, she had been humiliated by her own expectations and by the quiet, unwavering confidence of a man she had assumed was insignificant. And in that moment, Lila realized something she had never fully admitted to herself. The quietest, most unassuming person in the room, often overlooked, underestimated, and ignored, is sometimes the most powerful. Because their strength does not depend on wealth, fear, or status. It depends on something far rarer: courage, dignity, and unwavering self-respect. Lila's mind raced. She had never been challenged like this in her life. Her wealth, her influence, and her reputation had always been enough to intimidate anyone who crossed her path. But Daniel Brooks, the quiet janitor she had thought she could humiliate with ease, had completely upended her expectations. His calmness, his dignity, and his sharp, intelligent words had left her grasping for control she no longer had. "Do you even understand who I am?" she demanded again, her voice sharper, louder, trembling with frustration. "I am Lila Carrington. People fear me. I can destroy your life before the day ends." Daniel glanced up, his eyes calm, almost compassionate, and he spoke slowly, deliberately. "Ma'am, I understand exactly who you are. But fear is temporary, and power without respect is empty. You may have money and influence, but dignity and courage cannot be bought or destroyed. They come from within." Her anger spiked. How dare he speak to her this way? She had humiliated people with a glance, a word, a raised eyebrow. But he remained untouchable, unshaken, as if her insults and threats were meaningless air. She took a step closer, lowering her voice, trying to regain dominance. "You're lucky everyone here can see I'm being polite. If I wanted to, I could make you leave this building and never work again. Do you even realize what world you live in?" Daniel paused, resting a hand briefly on his mop, and looked her directly in the eye. "Ma'am, I am aware. But even if you did, it would not change my character, my dignity, or my integrity. True power lies not in controlling others, but in controlling oneself. And no amount of wealth can replace that." The lobby was tense. Staff members who had once feared Lila now watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide, as if witnessing history unfold. Guests whispered to one another, unable to believe what they were seeing. A billionaire being challenged, calmly, by a man she had assumed was beneath notice. Lila's mind raced for a comeback. She tried sarcasm, threats, and even a mocking tone. "Oh, so you're some kind of philosopher now, huh? You think a few fancy words make you clever enough to lecture me?" Daniel shook his head slightly, a polite, almost amused smile crossing his face. "Ma'am, it's not about being clever. It's about honesty. I may not have wealth or titles, but I do know how to stand with integrity. You may have influence, but without respect, it means nothing. You can intimidate, but you cannot command my self-respect. That is mine alone." Something inside Lila cracked. Her carefully constructed shield of arrogance, built over decades of power and control, was crumbling under the weight of one man's calm truth. She had walked into this lobby expecting fear, obedience, maybe even tears. Instead, she found a mirror reflecting her own flaws, her own insecurities, and her own misplaced reliance on money as a weapon. "Do you really think you can teach me anything?" she demanded, her voice shaking slightly despite her attempts to sound confident. "I've dealt with people far more educated than you, people far more cunning." "You," Daniel interrupted her, still calm, still poised. "Ma'am, I do not seek to teach. I only seek to live honestly, and in doing so, to remind others that respect and dignity matter more than wealth and fear. The lesson, if there is one, is yours to take or leave. But I will not compromise who I am for anyone, no matter how powerful they claim to be." The lobby went silent again. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Lila's face betrayed her shock, her anger, and, somewhere deep inside, a grudging realization that she had underestimated him entirely. This man, whom she had intended to belittle, had become the authority in the room, not through wealth, not through threats, but through confidence, composure, and unwavering self-respect. Her hands trembled slightly, tightening around her designer handbag. She had been prepared for obedience, for fear, for groveling. Instead, she was faced with calm courage that highlighted every flaw in her approach. Guests whispered again, and staff exchanged looks of disbelief and admiration. The billionaire woman, feared and untouchable for years, had been completely bested by a janitor who had quietly refused to bow. Finally, Daniel returned to his work, polishing the floors with the same calm precision as before. He did not gloat, did not sneer, did not need to. The message had been delivered perfectly. Lila, meanwhile, stood frozen, her chest heaving, her pride battling against an unfamiliar sensation, respect tinged with humiliation. She realized that in trying to assert dominance, she had revealed her own vulnerability, and that Daniel, with nothing but dignity and a perfect sentence in Chinese, had exposed it effortlessly. In that lobby, under the bright lights and the watchful eyes of guests and staff alike, a simple truth became undeniable. The quietest person in the room, the one everyone walks past, ignores, or underestimates, can often wield the greatest power. Because their strength does not rely on money, fear, or status. It relies on something far rarer: courage, integrity, and unwavering self-respect. And Daniel, the janitor, had just proven it beyond any doubt. For the first time in years, Lila Carrington felt powerless. Every instinct she had spent a lifetime honing, commanding attention, inspiring fear, bending situations to her will, had failed. The man she had intended to humiliate, to reduce to nothing in front of witnesses, had instead exposed a truth she had long ignored. Money could buy influence, but it could not buy respect, humility, or dignity. Daniel Brooks continued his work with serene precision, completely unshaken. Every movement, the sweep of his mop, the polish of the floor, spoke of patience, self-respect, and quiet strength. It was a stark contrast to Lila's frantic energy, her expensive suit, her designer handbag, symbols of wealth that now seemed meaningless in the face of his calm authority. She realized, painfully, that he had never been afraid of her, never cowered, and never needed to assert power. All he had needed was himself. She wanted to speak, to demand submission, to reassert her control, but words failed her. Every sentence she formed in her mind seemed inadequate, hollow, compared to his quiet, unwavering confidence. And then it hit her. She had underestimated him. She had assumed his position in life meant ignorance, weakness, and obedience. She had assumed that because he cleaned floors and swept corners, he was beneath her notice. And in that assumption, she had made a mistake, a colossal mistake. You understand Chinese?" she asked finally, her voice almost a whisper, tinged with awe and disbelief. Daniel looked up, meeting her gaze calmly. "Yes, ma'am. I understood every word. And I responded because respect and dignity are universal. They do not depend on wealth, status, or appearances." Lila swallowed, feeling a mix of humiliation and admiration. Around them, the lobby remained tense, staff and guests still watching. Whispers rippled through the room. No one had ever seen a confrontation like this. A billionaire humbled, a janitor victorious not through aggression, but through composure, intelligence, and moral strength. She wanted to retreat, to regain control somehow, but she knew it was impossible. Daniel had not just defended himself. He had demonstrated something far greater. That character and courage can turn even the most powerful people into learners, even in the blink of an eye. You've taught me something today, Lila admitted finally, her voice quieter, almost sincere. I didn't think someone like you could. Daniel smiled politely, returning to his work. Ma'am, it was never my intention to teach. I only live honestly and treat others with respect. If you've learned anything from today, then that is your own discovery. The words struck deeper than any insult or argument could have. Lila's hands loosened on her handbag. She had been ready to dominate, to insult, to remind him of his place. Instead, she had been reminded of hers, not by force, not by threat, but by the quiet strength of a man who refused to be intimidated. For the rest of the morning, Lila remained in the lobby, quietly observing. She watched Daniel work, saw the calm efficiency in every movement, and felt a strange mix of admiration and shame. He had been invisible to most, but now, in her eyes, he was extraordinary. She realized that she had learned more in those few minutes than she had in years of wealth, power, and influence. The other staff and guests couldn't stop talking about what had happened. The story spread quickly. The billionaire woman who thought she could insult anyone and get away with it had met her match in a quiet, unassuming janitor. Daniel had reminded everyone that power is not always loud, and strength is not always visible. Sometimes, the person you overlook is the one who commands the most respect. Lila left the building that day humbled. She didn't apologize immediately, nor did she attempt to belittle Daniel again. Instead, she carried with her the lesson he had demonstrated effortlessly. Humility, dignity, and courage are more powerful than any amount of money. And that lesson, she realized, was worth far more than her entire fortune. As for Daniel, he returned to his work without fanfare, sweeping floors, polishing surfaces, and moving with the calm certainty that comes from knowing your worth. To the casual observer, he was just a janitor. But to those who had witnessed that morning, the staff, the guests, and even Lila Carrington, he had proven that true power does not come from wealth or status. It comes from integrity, composure, and the courage to stand your ground, no matter who stands in front of you. By the end of the day, one thing was clear. Daniel Brooks had turned an ordinary morning into a lesson that no one in that lobby would ever forget. A billionaire woman, used to control and fear, had been humbled by the quiet confidence of a man she thought was insignificant. And in that quiet triumph, the world was reminded of a truth too often ignored. The quietest person in the room is usually the one you should never underestimate.